Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to recommend some books that were published between 1900 and 1950. And this is in honor of the upcoming 1900 to 1950 Readathon, which is taking place during the month of May, and it is hosted by the wonderful Katie from the BookTube channel Books and Things. I will link her announcement video in the description box so you can check that out. But today I want to recommend some of my favorite books from between 1900 and 1950. Normally when I do recommendations videos, I try and stick to one book per author, but there were several instances where I just couldn't pick between books, and therefore I'm recommending several books of the same author. I was also not sure how to actually sort this list because I have quite a few recommendations. I have about 20 titles written down. You will find links to the books in the description box and also timestamps to the different decades, because this list is going to be presented chronologically per decade. We have 20-ish books to discuss. I expect this is going to be a slightly longer one. Let's start with my favorite books from the first decade of the 1900s, and we start with a novel that feels Victorian, that we think of as Victorian, that we think of as part of 19th century literature rather than 20th century literature, and that is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. This was in fact published in 1901, even though the serialized novel, I believe, was episodically released the previous year. Either way, this is a novel of the 20th century and not of the 19th century, though it reads and feels like a Victorian novel. It is set in the Victorian time period, and in my opinion, this is the best Sherlock Holmes work, definitely the best Sherlock Holmes novel, and also the perfect place to start if you haven't read any Sherlock Holmes yet, but you are interested in reading Sherlock Holmes stories. I have, by the way, made a whole separate video called Where to Start with Sherlock Holmes, which I'll link in the description box. The Hound of the Baskervilles takes us out of London, where most Sherlock Holmes stories are set, although not all of them. And we travel to the sort of dark and misty landscape of Devonshire, where Sherlock Holmes and his trusty friend Dr. Watson are investigating some mysterious murders that seem to have been caused by a haunted hellhound. This novel is absolutely iconic and I cannot recommend it highly enough if you haven't read Sherlock Holmes yet. What I love about this is that we really get a sense of the detectives, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, in this really creepy, mysterious setting. Incidentally, I am wearing my Sherlock Holmes jumper today, and you can get this jumper and many other jumpers, t-shirts and other things with cats and classic literature at shop.spencerslibrary.com, which is also linked in the description box. As you can see here, my jumper has got Sherlock Holmes, where is he? Sherlock Holmes as a cat and Dr. Watson as a cat standing in the gloomy streets of London, following some what looks like dog footprints with the iconic line, "The game is afoot." My next recommendation is from 1905, and that is Frances Hodgson Burnett's novel A Little Princess, which also has that Victorian feel and belongs to one of my favorite story tropes, that is the boarding school novel. In A Little Princess, we follow a girl who is privileged. She has had a mostly happy childhood, and she comes from wealth, and she is intelligent and popular and makes friends easily. She starts life at a boarding school in London. Shortly after her arrival and her first happy experiences at the boarding school, though, she is very much dethroned. She loses her status as a little princess and has to start again from the very bottom. She's thrown into a completely new situation, and she really only has her wits and her own personality to keep her going. It is what I like to think of as a reverse Cinderella narrative. I really enjoyed this novel when I first read it. It's definitely due a reread for me. It's a novel full of warmth and full of heart. The boarding school setting, the beautiful writing, the immersive story, and the wonderful characters make it just such a lovely read. Next up, I have a trio of recommendations for you from one of my favorite authors, E.M. Forster. He wrote 6 novels during, well, the first quarter of the 20th century, really, and I want to recommend these 3 to begin with. In 1905, he published Where Angels Fear to Tread. In 1908, there was A Room with a View, and then in 1909 came the short story The Machine Stops. So let me talk you through these 3 first of all. Where Angels Fear to Tread and A Room with a View are commonly known as his Italian novels because, well, both of them are partly set in Italy. In Where Angels Fear to Tread, we get a very satirical take on a sort of love story, on a romance. And we follow a young woman who leaves her family behind for a holiday in Italy where she promptly falls in love with a young Italian man, which shocks her family in England beyond imagining. And what starts off as a satire of a clash of cultures quickly turns somewhat tragic. And there is a lot of, cultural differences, not just between English people and Italian people, but also between women and the men. And in the end, it is a story about a woman who knows what she wants, but lives in a society that doesn't allow her to express it. And those are the kind of characters that E.M. Forster writes really well. People who are strong-willed, but don't know how to live their true selves in the society that they find themselves in, which is often repressed English society of the early 20th century. A Room with a View is similar and different to Where Angels Fear to Tread. We also have a Italy-based romance, but this one is a little bit more earnest, a little bit more serious. Although when I say that, all of E.M. Forster's novels have got a healthy dose of satire, a healthy dose of humour in them. A Room with a View, to me, read like the perfect summer holiday read. A Room with a View really is almost the quintessential E.M. Forster novel. It has the sentimental romance aspect, it's got societal criticism, it's got humour and satire, it's got some truly memorable characters, and a healthy dose of escapism. I can highly recommend both novels, A Room with a View and Where Angels Fear to Tread, if you too feel like a little escape to Italy. The third E.M. Forster that I want to recommend for this decade, The Machine Stops, is actually not a novel, but a short story, and one that has had a little bit of a renaissance in this year of social isolation. And that is because it is, in fact, a dystopian short story. In The Machine Stops, we explore a society in which every single person lives socially isolated, as we say in 2021, in their own little bubble, in what is pictured as a gigantic sort of beehive of interconnected cells. Like in most dystopian stories, you get a world where everyone is sort of kept safe if they play along with it. But as soon as people ask questions of the system and want to break out, they are then suddenly put in danger. It really is a typical dystopian story written by someone who is not known for writing dystopian stories. E.M. Forster's novels are often considered sort of domestic societal novels, like Jane Austen, but for the 20th century. And The Machine Stops is such a wonderful tale that combines the E.M. Forster style that we know and love with this, at that time, incredibly new and emerging genre of the dystopian story. So if you have an interest in E.M. Forster, if you have an interest in dystopian fiction, you must read The Machine Stops. It's a very short read as well, but you will not regret it. Let's move on to the 1910s, where we continue talking about E.M. Forster, because the next novel from 1910 is one of my favorite E.M. Forster stories, and that is Howard's End. Howard's End is set in London and follows 2 sisters who are clever, intelligent, know what they want. They're your typical E.M. Forster character. They are also rich, but like all E.M. Forster characters, they are restrained by the society around them. They both follow completely different paths in life. But what makes the story so wonderful is the relationship between them and the tension and love between them, how that interplays with their various other exploits, especially, of course, their romantic relationships. I always think of Howard's End as a parallel to Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, which was, of course, also set around two very different sisters and their situation in life. So if you enjoyed Sense and Sensibility and you want to read a 20th century novel set around sisters, I can really recommend Howard's End. It is a beautiful book. Like all of Ian Forster's writing, I feel like it fits perfectly into this time of year. It is such a perfect spring book that really transports you into a different time. Once again, it is his characters that really make the story come to life, and Howard's End is just a masterpiece. From 1911, and again we go back to an author I have already spoken about, I want to recommend The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, her other famous novel that is not A Little Princess. The Secret Garden again combines the fairy tale aspect with a sort of Victorian tinged children's story. And our main character is a very grumpy girl who moves into a huge spooky manor house in the middle of the English countryside. But there she discovers, as the title suggests, a secret garden, and through her exploration of the garden she also finds herself. It is a coming of age story in a way where a girl finds friendship in the nature around her, and by the nature around her I don't just mean the plants and the animals and the trees that grow in the garden, but I mean the very people around her and the place in which she lives. So it's a story about finding contentment and finding happiness. And again wrapped up in the beautiful prose of Frances Hodgson Burnett that makes every page read like a poem. It is an absolutely stunning novel, and if you've not read it, then what are you waiting for? From 1919, I want to recommend Virginia Woolf's novel Night and Day, the so far only novel of Virginia Woolf's that I have actually read, and it is one that I haven't heard talked about a lot, and I really don't understand why, because it is a wonderful novel. I have done a whole review video about that, link in the description box, so again I'll try and keep it brief. Night and Day follows 4 characters in Edwardian London, as many of these books are set, and their relationships with each other and with other people. And similar to E.M. Forster, there is a big theme of finding your own place in society, or figuring out if the place that you occupy in society is really where you want to be. Because it's Virginia Woolf, there is a lot of sort of stream of consciousness, inner monologue, but we follow not just one character, but 4 different people as they explore their inner lives and their outward relationships with other people and with society as a whole. We have made it to the 1920s, and we start once again with E.M. Forster. I'm sorry, I know I just couldn't cut E.M. Forster from this list. I tried, I couldn't. Anyway, in 1924 he published his possibly best known novel, A Passage to India. This book explores the oppressive nature of the English occupation of India during the time through a personal and a legal conflict between some characters in the story. As in all E.M. Forster stories, there are small things, subtle plot points that have a hurricane of meaning behind them, and A Passage to India is the novel that possibly is the most masterful example of this particular aspect of his writing. I wouldn't recommend this as your first E.M. Forster novel. In fact, if you want to know what you should read as your first E.M. Forster novel, I did a whole video about that as well, called Where to Start with E.M. Forster. Link, you know where. But it is a masterpiece as well. It is a stunningly written novel with many, many, many layers of meaning. And while it is more serious in tone than the other novels that I have suggested, there is also a lot more to it. It's a very deep novel. There is a lot to explore. From 1929, I want to recommend a German children's classic. If you are familiar with German literature, you've probably heard of Erich Kästner and his novel Emil und die Detektive. This is an adventure story set in Berlin where a boy tries to chase down the man who robbed him of his only money through the streets of Berlin with a group of children who call themselves the detectives. It's been a while since I last read this, but I didn't want to leave this off that list because it is one of those novels through which you really experience a place, a time and place specifically, in this case Berlin in the 1920s, through the eyes of someone who is new to it, like Emil, the boy at the center of the story. If you had the misfortune of growing up without reading his novels as a child, then I suggest you rectify that immediately and pick up some of the translations of his works, which I'll link down below. From 1929, I want to recommend A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which I have also done a separate video about. Links abound in this description box to this video. And A Room of One's Own is, of course, not a novel. In fact, I think it's the only book on this list that's not a novel. It is a treatise, a pamphlet, a written lecture on the place of women with a creative spark, written in Virginia Woolf's meandering, inward-looking style. It is a very, very short book, though, so if you are unsure about it, I would say give it a go. You will find it surprisingly relevant to this day. I mean, I mostly read it out of a sort of academic curiosity of an important part of sort of feminist literary history, but I found myself wanting to underline bits. I didn't underline anything, by the way, because I borrowed the book from the library and I am a civilized person. But I really was surprised by the relevance of many of her arguments in the book to this day. What's this? We're in the 1930s already, and the next novel is another one by German children's classics author Erich Kästner, my personal favorite of his novels, Pünktchen und Anton. In English, this one's called Dot and Anton. This is my favorite of his novels because I think it most perfectly combines his political message with the sort of adventure and friendship story that it is told through. Pünktchen and Anton is a story about the friendship of two very different children, a rich daughter of a factory owner and the son of a single working mother. And the two become the closest of friends and they tackle their problems, their various problems, together. Just like his other novels, set against the backdrop of 1920s Berlin. What's special about this book is that the author inserts himself a lot in the story. There are many parts where he directly speaks to the reader and points out bits in the story that might have a deeper meaning, or takes aspects of his story as if he was observing the story and extrapolates and talks about various issues that are brought up in the story. It's an experience of a read, but a really wonderful book. We stay in Germany with our next book. Published in 1933 was Das Kunstseidene Mädchen by Irmgard Keun. This is a book by an author who I had never heard of until last year or possibly 2 years ago. This is an incredibly funny and incredibly critical book about women and how they have to adapt to make the world work for them. This book follows a young woman who has great ambitions of becoming a film star. Unfortunately, she works a secretarial job in a sort of unimportant town somewhere in Germany. She escapes to Berlin, and the book is mostly about her exploits there and her attempts at surviving and her attempts at realizing her dream of becoming a star. It sounds satirical because it is, but it also has a lot of warmth to it, and it also has a lot of darkness to it. The style was like nothing I've read before. It's very chaotic, it's very wild and exuberant and full of life, and I really enjoyed that about this novel. This book has been translated into English as well as The Artificial Silk Girl. Finally, for the 1930s, I want to recommend a book that I'm sure you are tired of hearing by now, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which was published in 1938. I actually recorded my experience of reading this book. Link, you know where to find it. And if you watch that video of me experiencing this story, you will see just how surprised I was by this book. I didn't know what to expect when I went into it. I knew it was sort of spooky, I knew it was sort of romantic, but I didn't quite know what to get. And what I got was a really amazing example of the English country house novel. Rebecca is as much about the setting as it is about the people in the story. The main character, a naive young woman who has married a man of wealth and heritage, is completely lost in her new life and is sort of haunted by the ghost of her predecessor, of her husband's first wife who died. As she discovers more about her husband and his first wife's past, she also discovers more about herself, and all of that set against this really creepy backdrop of the English country house. A very atmospheric novel, and not one I would recommend you read in the sort of springtime, summer. This is one where you really want to wait until it gets dark outside and windy and cold, so that the chill that sort of spreads through the book will get to you as well. And we have made it to the 1940s, the last decade that I'm talking about in this video. And my first recommendation for that is a whole series of children's boarding school novels. I know, I just love them too much. This is the St. Clair's series by Enid Blyton, which is a series of 4 books beginning with the novel The Twins at St. Clair's. And this was published between 1941 and 1944. These are your archetypal English boarding school novels with all of the failings and problematic aspects and downsides of the archetype of the English boarding school novel. These stories are set around privileged girls at boarding schools and their moral failings, which are mostly unladylike things like being messy, or not being interested in learning, or not being humble, or not being modest. And then by the end of the story, through the great democracy of the classroom and some gentle prodding from the teachers, these girls are transformed into proper young ladies, and they know how to behave with a grace of their gender. Don't take these books too seriously when you read them, but I had to include them on the list because they are some of my favorites. I grew up on these books. I think I always read them with a critical eye. All of the boarding school novels that I love so much, you kind of have to read with a critical eye, and these are no exceptions. But if you like your boarding school novels, if you want to see some silly stories of girls basically having to give up their individuality, then give them a go. They're very short books. From 1945, a children's classic that will mean a lot to a lot of you, but probably won't mean all that much if you are British or American. Because for some reason these books have not quite achieved the same cult status. They have not quite become the classics they are in other countries. Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. I feel like about 50% of you are now sentimentally thinking back at your own time reading the books, or maybe watching the old films, and half of you are looking at me like, Pippi what? This is a book, at the beginning of a series of books, but I just want to talk about the first one in this, published in 1945 by Swedish author Astrid Lindgren, about the most amazing girl called Pippi. And she lives all by herself in a gigantic mansion. Her father is a pirate, and therefore he has left her a lot of money. She doesn't like school, she doesn't like adults, she doesn't like the order of things. She is incredibly strong, physically and emotionally. She knows what she wants, she knows what she enjoys. She's a bad influence on her twin friends, Tom and Annika, and she gets up to a lot of shenanigans with her pet horse and monkey. I haven't reread these in a while. I feel like they're definitely due a reread. If you grew up without these wonderfully quirky stories, then rectify that immediately. I can also recommend the old films, and the theme tune is stuck in my head right now, just going around on a loop. From 1948, I want to recommend a novel that I have recommended many times before because I love it so much, and that is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This story is a diary novel set in a old, ancient, dilapidated castle where our main character Cassandra lives with her quirky family. She has a romantic older sister and a esoteric stepmother and a author father who has had writer's block for years, and she just tries to navigate life in this very strange living situation when sometimes all she wants is to actually have a warm house and access to books. This novel is funny. It is another one of those sister novels. You know what, I should do a whole video just about sister novels. This novel is very aware of its status as a sister novel. There are frequent comparisons to Jane Austen within the novel, and the narration is absolutely wonderful. For those of you who have read it, the ending wasn't quite my thing. I'm not going to spoil it for those of you who haven't read it, but in my opinion, the ending didn't ruin the rest of the story for me, because it was still an absolutely lovely, hilarious, interesting novel. It's got that sort of young adult feel, but before young adult was a thing. And also, I should add, a perfect springtime novel as well. The final novel I want to recommend from 1949, and this is a novel I feel like I don't have to say that much about. It is 1984 by George Orwell. Possibly the most famous dystopian classic. This is the novel that you find quoted and misquoted over and over again on Twitter. And if you haven't read it, then you should, purely so you understand when references and allusions to 1984 are made where they really should not be made. Separate video about this video linked in, you know where to find all the links. I read this out of an interest in dystopian classics. I wanted to read the foremost dystopian classic. Similar to the Virginia Woolf book I discussed earlier, I didn't expect to find so many things still so relevant. Obviously, the technology and also the exact nature of this dystopian system are not, they're very of their time. They're very sort of 1940s-ish. But there are broader lessons and broader meanings and broader thoughts that are discussed in the book that are 100% something that we should still be talking about today. This is not an easy novel. This is not a short novel. It is long and it is depressing and it is dark, so dark. And there are no moments of lightness in the book. There are no moments of humor to interrupt just the constant weight of the novel. So this is something I would only recommend you read if you feel ready for it. And otherwise, you might want to leave this to a later date. So there you go. These are some recommendations of books from 1900s to 1949. If you're taking part in Katie's readathon, the 1900 to 1950 readathon, let me know. And you can expect some more videos about this topic in the next weeks. Soon there will be my own TBR for that particular readathon, and there will probably be the odd video in May about early 1900s. I was going to say 19th century, that's not true. About early 20th century literature. Right, this video really has been long enough. Make sure you open the description box for all of the links that I have incessantly mentioned, like I am just a self-referential reference. Anyway, let me know what your favorite early 20th century books are. I realized there are some big gaps on there. Agatha Christie is one that comes to mind, but you know, I haven't read everything yet. I'm trying really hard, but I just haven't read everything yet. Thank you for watching. Bye.